Okay, let me ask you something. And I want you to really think about this before you answer. How many times does something have to happen before you call it a coincidence? Because I've been sitting with this story for a while now, and I'm not going to lie to you. It bothered me, like genuinely bothered me. You see, I'm not the kind of person that runs around and points fingers at shadows. That's not the kind of stuff that we do here. We follow the facts, we do our best to look at what's real, and then we call it like we see it. But every now and then, something lands in your lap that just doesn't sit right. No matter how many times you look at it, and no matter how many times you try to explain it away. And guys, this is one of those times. We have 11 scientists, and I'm talking about 11 highly educated, highly cleared, and deeply connected people. People tied to aerospace, defense, energy research, advanced physics, and programs so classified that most of their families didn't even know what they actually did for a living. And they're all gone. They're either missing or gone under circumstances that most people have not been able to explain any way that makes sense. And here's the part that really gets me. This isn't some back alley conspiracy that people are talking about in the back corners of the internet. The media, it's actually covering this. You have major outlets, real journalists, and real questions being asked out loud. And those questions, they got so loud that it reached the White House. President Trump himself said that he wants the government to dig deeper into these cases. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. The President of the United States actually acknowledged this. And people are still gone, scientists are still turning up, and all these cases, or most of these cases, are unsolved. So, let me go ahead and ask you this. If the most powerful man in the country is pointing at this thing and he's saying that something isn't right, what does that tell you about how deep this might go? Because to me, that's not reassuring. That's terrifying. Welcome back, listeners and watchers, to another episode of Relative Perspective. As always, I'm your host, Stephen, and tonight we're talking about the 11. And believe me, this goes way deeper than you can imagine. And if this is your first time joining us, I want to welcome you to the crew. If you've been rocking with us, you already know what time it is. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button, pound down on the like button, and share this with someone who loves a crazy deep dive. And as always, I want you to remember, the truth, it depends on where you're standing. And that, my friends, is Relative Perspective. Okay, let's go ahead and start with the one that started it all for me. The one that made me sit back in my chair and say, wait a minute, his name is William Neil McCasland. And if you've never heard that name before, you were probably never supposed to. Now, before I get into what happened to this man, you need to understand who he was, because that part matters. It matters a whole lot. Now, McCasland, he wasn't some low-level government employee pushing papers somewhere in the back office. This man was a retired two-star Air Force general. Now, you don't get 2 stars by being average. You don't get 2 stars by knowing just a little bit about a little bit. You get 2 stars by knowing everything about things that most people will never even get close to knowing. And McCasland, he knew plenty. Now, one of the main things he did was he led the Air Force Research Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base there in Ohio. Now, if that name doesn't mean anything to you, let me go ahead and break it down real simple. The Air Force Research Laboratory is where serious science meets serious money meets serious secrecy. We're talking direct energy research, advanced propulsion concepts, next generation's weapons development, and sensor technology so advanced that it'll make your head spin. This is a place where stuff that doesn't exist yet, it gets built. And McCasland, he was running it all. But here's where it gets really, really interesting. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, it's not just any base. That place has been floating around UFO mythology for decades. Some researchers believe that that's where some recovered craft was taken from Roswell, and where the bodies were originally stored. It's also where the deepest secrets of the aerospace world have been locked away from American citizens since the 1940s. Now, one former national security analyst that worked for the Department of Defense, he described Wright-Patterson Air Force Base as where all the super secret research, it happens. Now look, I'm not here to tell you what to believe about anything that I just said. What I'm here to tell you is that McCasland, he spent a large part of his career leading that place. Now, here's where the story it stops being just interesting and it starts being something else entirely. We're going to go back to 2016 where WikiLeaks it drops a huge dump of emails from a guy by the name of John Podesta. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it definitely should. John Podesta was actually Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. He was one of the most powerful political figures in America at that time. And buried inside that email dump was a message from a guy by the name of Tom DeLonge. Now, I'm sure you've heard that name. Tom DeLonge, he's the guitarist for Blink 182. Now, before you laugh, I want you to hear me out because this isn't a joke. DeLonge, he had spent years quietly working with different people in government and military trying to figure out what's going on with this UFO stuff. And he wasn't playing around about it either. He sent Podesta an email, and on the email, the subject line, all it read was General McCasland. And in that email, DeLonge, he wrote about McCasland directly. He said that McCasland, he was not a skeptic of UFOs, according to what he told him, but he did tell the public that he was. He said that he'd actually been working with McCasland for 4 months. DeLonge said that McCasland was, and I'm quoting here, very, very aware as he was in charge of all that stuff. And then he said this. When Roswell crashed, he said that they shipped it to the laboratory right there at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And like we said earlier, General McCasland, he was in charge of that exact same laboratory. And then DeLonge, he named McCasland as a very, very important man, as you can imagine. Now, I want you to go ahead and let that sink in for a second. You have a rock star that's emailing one of the most powerful political operatives in the country about a 2-star Air Force general who says that he knew exactly what happened out there at Roswell. And believe it or not, it gets deeper because WikiLeaks, it also released a calendar notification and it was buried in that same email dump. And on that notification, it showed that a meeting was actually scheduled between DeLonge, McCasland, and Podesta. Now, whether that meeting actually happened, nobody really knows. But the fact that it was scheduled, that right there tells you everything you need to know about how important this stuff was to them. We're not talking about dark internet forums and late night radio shows. We're talking about a rock star, a campaign chairman, a 2-star general, all sitting in a room together talking about none other than Roswell. And these are just a few examples of the kind of man that we're dealing with when we're talking about General McCasland. Now, let's go ahead and fast forward 10 years to February of 2026. 1 week after President Trump publicly announced that he wanted Pete Hegseth to release as much information about the UFO topic that he could, McCasland, he vanished. He went missing from his home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I need you to go ahead and sit with that timing for a second. The President of the United States says that he wants all this UFO stuff to be released to the public. And 1 week later, one of the men who probably knows more about all these secrets, he goes missing. Now, here's where all these details, they start getting under my skin. When they found out that he was missing, they noticed that he left his phone, his prescription glasses, and his smartwatch. Now, I want you to go ahead and think about your own life for a second. How many times do you actually leave your house without your phone? I mean, hell, I can't even walk to the mailbox without mine in my hand. And honestly, I'd be falling all over myself without wearing my glasses. So right away, something about this, it feels off. But here's what reportedly wasn't left behind. He took his boots, his wallet, and a .38 caliber revolver in a leather holster. So now we got a picture forming, and that picture's not that pretty. Either this man, he walked out of his own life completely on purpose, or you had somebody who understood exactly how these things work, made sure that it looked that way. And the people that are paying close attention to this case, they noticed that too. You had an investigative journalist by the name of Ross Coulthart who has spent years digging into UAP stuff and conspiracy stuff. He came out publicly and called McCasland's disappearance a grave national security crisis. He said that McCasland is a man with, and I'm quoting, some of the most sensitive secrets of the United States locked in his head. Now, let me say that again. He said a grave national security crisis. Those aren't just small words. That's not just some random person on the internet running their mouth. That's a seasoned investigative journalist who knows this world inside and out. And he's saying out loud that this situation, it is serious. And then the FBI gets involved. Now, I want you to think about that. A silver alert gets issued for a missing 68-year-old man, and then the FBI shows up. Now, that same journalist cohort that we spoke about earlier, he specifically brought this point out. He said the fact that the FBI was even brought in is very significant. Because as you know, the FBI, it doesn't just show up for anyone. They show up when the person who goes missing matters at a level that most of us don't fully understand. Now, the FBI, they went all out on this one. Over 700 homeowners were contacted during that search that lived in that neighborhood. They had foot searches, coordinated multi-agency operations. Hell, they brought out everything that they had. And not long into this search, they found an Air Force t-shirt about 1.25 miles away from McCasland's home. Then later on, they found his hiking boots. But McCasland himself, still nothing at the time of this recording. There's no clean answers, no satisfying explanation. There's just silence. So let me bring this all the way back around for you. We've got a 2-star Air Force general who knows where the bodies are buried, so to speak. He's been in charge of things that we probably can't even imagine, and his secrets probably have secrets. And then 1 week after President Trump says that he wants to declassify UAP stuff, this man, he walks out of his house, and the world, they hadn't heard from him since. Now, maybe there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for all this. Maybe. But here's what I keep coming back to. If history shows us anything, men who know too much, they have a way of disappearing right when their knowledge becomes the most dangerous thing in the world. And William Neil McCasland, he knew a lot. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to say something for the record. I am a very, very happy man. I love my wife, Robin. I love my kids, Ava and Wesley, and I speak to my mom every day on the phone. So, if I go missing after this video drops, I want you guys to ask some really serious questions. Because believe me, I ain't going nowhere voluntarily. I'm just saying. Now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get back to the 11 missing people. And here's what I need you to understand before we go through every single case. One disappearance, it doesn't mean much. I'll give you that. One case can be personal tragedy. One case can be bad timing. And one case can just be random chaos in a crazy world. But that's not what we're talking about here. Because when you start looking at where these people worked, that's when it stops feeling random. Every single one of these 11 people connect back to one of 5 specific places. And not just any 5 places. We're talking about the places that built the bombs, the places that tracked the asteroids, the places that stop something from ending life on this planet before it happens, and the kind of places where you don't just need a badge to get through the front door. You need clearance. And then you need clearance above that clearance. You have NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. You have Los Alamos in New Mexico. Then you have MIT. Then there's the Kansas City National Security Campus. And again, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. You have 5 institutions sitting at the absolute center of America's most sensitive, most classified, and most consequential scientific work out of every university, every research facility, and every laboratory in the entire country. And these 11 people all connect back to one of those 5 places. Now, I want you to tell me, does that sound random to you? Because it damn sure doesn't sound random to me at all. And when you start looking at what these people were actually working on, that's when the picture, it really starts to come into focus. First, you had a guy by the name of Michael Hicks, who spent years trying to identify rocks the size of mountains hurling through space towards Earth. Now, that's not a hobby. That's the kind of work that keeps you on somebody's radar. Then you had a guy by the name of Grillmair. He built telescope systems that were the eyes of America's planetary defense programs. This is basically the detection backbone that tells us what's coming, and it tells us how fast it's coming. Then you had a lady by the name of Reza who invented this really strong metal alloy that was strong enough to survive those rocket engines. Now, I know that there was a lot more probably to it, but believe me, I'm not Mr. Wizard, but just know that her research was really, really important because it went directly into America's most advanced reusable rocket programs. And McCasland, the guy that we spoke about earlier, he sat at the top of all of it. He ran the laboratory that funded and directed the most advanced aerospace and weapons research that this country has ever produced. Understand, these weren't just scientists. These were the architects of America's ability to see what's coming and respond to it. Now, here's where it gets really personal for me, because I started looking at how these people disappeared, and there's a pattern that I just can't shake. First, there was Jason Thomas, who left his phone and wallet at home the night he vanished. Then you had a guy by the name of Anthony Chavez. He left his wallet, his keys. Hell, he left pretty much everything just sitting right there. His car was locked in the driveway. There was no signs of struggle. There was no forced entry. Hell, it looked like he just vanished. Then you had a guy by the name of Steve Garcia who walked out of his Albuquerque home on foot. Now, this is going to sound really familiar because he was carrying a handgun. He left his phone, his wallet, and his car behind. The police, of course, put out a statement that said that he might have been a danger to himself. But an anonymous source that was really close to that case, they pushed back really hard. They called him a very, very stable person. They said the mental health angle that they were trying to push, it didn't look like him at all. He was not like that. And then there's a woman by the name of Melissa Casias. Y'all, this one right here, this one bothered me more than almost any other story that you're going to hear tonight. Melissa, she was an administrative employee at Los Alamos Laboratories. Now, she wasn't low level. She definitely had clearance and she knew things. The day of her disappearance, she basically did her normal routine. Hell, she even picked up a sandwich and dropped it off to her daughter. To her family, they said it seemed just like any other normal day. But when they came home, they noticed her car was in the driveway, her purse was inside the house, along with her keys and her phone. And she didn't just have one phone, she actually had a work phone. But here's the part that I want you to pay attention to because it stopped me cold. Both of those phones, they had been factory reset. Every contact, every message, every piece of communication that she had done recently, it was all wiped clean. Now, I need you to think about that really, really carefully because people, they forget their phones all the time. People, they leave their wallets at home. And people, they tend to have bad days. But I have never heard of anyone factory resetting two phones, and they do all that before they go for a walk and never be seen, and they're never seen again. I don't know about you, but to me, that's not an accident. That's somebody making sure that whatever was on those phones, it never gets seen again. And her family, the people who know her the best, they pushed back hard on the idea that she left on her own. And here's why. They said that she was just 4 days away from helping take care of her mom who was about to go into surgery. Now, you don't factory reset your phones and you don't walk away from your family 4 days before your mom goes under the knife. To me, that sounds like something you just wouldn't do. Hell, I know I wouldn't, because if I did, I know my mom would whip my ass. Now, I know this isn't a laughing matter, but it's true. I mean, think about how silly that sounds. Now, I also need to talk about what happened right after Monica Reza's disappearance. Remember, that's the lady that created those metal alloys for the rockets. Monica, she was hiking with a friend of hers in the Angeles National Forest. It said that they were about 30 feet apart on a pretty busy trail in broad daylight. Now, the guy that was with her, he turned around and she smiled at him and she waved, just basically to let him know that she was okay. And when he realized that he thought that she was okay, he turned around and he kept walking. Then he turned around a few seconds later to look again. She was gone. She had vanished. There was no screams. There was no call for help. They couldn't find her anywhere on the trail. She was just gone. And they brought out the works. Search teams, they scoured that whole trail for days. They brought out helicopters that were in the air, ground crews that were on foot. They didn't find anything. They found no trace of her. There was no body. I mean, she had just gone. But here's the detail that I can't get out of my head. 4 days after Monica disappeared, while those helicopters were still in the air, looking for her, somebody actually created a memorial page for her on a website, and it was called Find a Grave. And another weird thing is they listed her date of death for June 22nd of that year, and that was the same day that she vanished. And they also listed her remains as what they called a green burial. Now, a green burial is basically them not pumping any embalming fluid in you or putting you in some kind of a non-biodegradable casket. You basically just return to the earth. They put you in a simple shroud, a biodegradable container, and a shallow grave. We're talking maybe 2 or 3 feet deep. Now, who in the hell does that? Who creates a memorial for a missing person 4 days after they go missing? And not only that, they do it while the search is still going on. And then they list a specific burial method for a body that hadn't even been located yet. I genuinely don't know the answer to that. All I do know is that it bothers me. It bothers the hell out of me. Now, look, I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, Stephen, this sounds like a lot of people on the internet are connecting dots that don't connect. And believe me, I hear you. I really do. But here's my problem with that. The FBI, the House Oversight Committee, and the President of the United States, they're not tinfoil hat people on the internet. The FBI said that they're now leading an effort in trying to find connections to this case, and not just the FBI. They're going to be working hand in hand with the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. And not only that, they're going to be working with local law enforcement agencies as well. They're launching this investigation because they're worried about our nation's scientists. Hell, they even wrote Kash Patel himself, he's the director of FBI, trying to find out what the heck he's doing to protect these guys, if anything. And President Trump, after sitting down for a personal briefing on this exact topic, he called it, and I quote, some pretty serious stuff. So the next time someone comes at you and tries to wave this away as some kind of conspiracy theory, you tell them to go have that conversation with the FBI first. Because when the most powerful government in the world starts pulling all these cases into one room and starts trying to find the connection, then that doesn't sound like a conspiracy theory to me. And here's a really important question about all this. First, you have to ask, what's going on? And then you have to ask, who benefits from it? Okay, now that we've established the pattern, we've looked at McCasland, we've looked at the institutions, and we've looked at what these people knew and what they worked on. But sadly, I haven't told you about all of them yet, and I really, really need to. Because every single one of these people, they deserve more than just being a name on this list. They were real people, they had families, they had careers, and they busted their ass to get to where they were. And they still had futures. And one by one, they're gone. So let's take a second to go through them, all of them. First, we have a guy by the name of Frank Maiwald. Frank, he spent over 25 years at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratories. 25 years, that's not a job, that's a calling. Now, this guy, he did some really cool stuff. He was a senior radio frequency engineer who specialized in building instruments that were capable of finding chemical signatures of like water and stuff out in space. Now, the reason why this was important was this was the kind of markers that scientists used to figure out if there was other planets besides Earth that could hold life. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. This man spent his entire career asking one of the most important questions that humanity has ever asked. And that question is, are we alone? And on July 4th of 2024, Frank died in Los Angeles at 61 years old. Now, here's what bothers me about Frank's case. No cause of death was ever publicly disclosed. A man who spent 25 years working on some of America's most sensitive research, and nobody has an answer as to why. There was no explanation, no statement, nothing. There was just silence. And in this story, we've learned what silence could mean. Then we have a guy by the name of Michael David Hicks. Now, Michael, he worked at JPL for nearly 25 years as well. Like I said before, he specialized in comets and asteroids. Now, his claim of fame is that he worked on NASA's DART mission. This was a program that actually went out there and tested whether we could deflect the asteroid that was coming towards Earth or not. Now you understand how important his work was. It was basically Earth's insurance policy. And he was one of the people that was building it. Michael, he died on July 30th of 2023. That was almost a year to the day that Frank died. And just like Frank, his cause of death was never disclosed. His daughter had told reporters that her father had been struggling with some medical issues, and that the speculation around his death basically had her shaken up pretty bad. Now, I don't want to add to that family's pain. I genuinely don't. But I also can't ignore the fact that two JPL scientists working on some of the most sensitive research in this country died within a year of each other. And neither one of them had publicly disclosed causes of death. There was two of them with no answers, just silence again. Then we mentioned Carl Grillmair earlier. Carl, he was a Canadian astrophysicist that spent over 30 years at Caltech. He worked on the Hubble Space Telescope and the Spitzer Space Telescope. Now, this dude, he has a long list of accomplishments. He discovered dozens of stellar streams. He discovered remnants of ancient collisions between galaxies, and he discovered water on multiple planets outside of our solar system. Not only that, he published 147 peer-reviewed papers, And he won the NASA's Exceptional Scientific Achievement Medal. And not only that, his colleagues described him as irreplaceable. Now, that says a lot about a guy. He's worked really hard over the years, and it definitely shows. And then on February 16th of 2026, not that long ago, Carl, he was shot and killed outside his own home in Llano, California. A 29-year-old man by the name of Freddie Snyder was arrested and charged with his murder. Authorities believe that the two men didn't know each other. And they're also saying that it's just a random act of violence, and maybe it was. But here's the detail that I can't get past. Freddie Snyder had been arrested just 2 months earlier for trespassing on Carl's property. And not only that, he was carrying a rifle. So, you got the man who allegedly had killed Carl had already been found on his property with a weapon just 2 months before. And somehow, that didn't stop what happened next. I'm not here to convince anybody. The courts will handle that, hopefully. But I am here to ask the question. How does somebody get caught trespassing on a scientist's property? Not only that, he's carrying a damn rifle. And 2 months later, that same scientist ends up by the same guy. I'm just asking the question because to me, someone needs to. Next, we have a guy by the name of Nuno Loureiro. Now, Nuno, he was a Portuguese plasma physicist, and he was also the director of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center. This is actually MIT's largest laboratory. And in January of 2025, just months before his death, President Joe Biden had personally presented him with the Presidential Early Career Award. Now, I want you to think about that. The president personally honored this man for his work, and less than a year later, he's gone. On December 15th of 2025, Nuno was shot in his apartment building in Brookline, Massachusetts, and he died the following morning. And the suspect was a guy by the name of Claudio Valiente. And this dude also carried out a mass shooting at Brown University just 2 days before that. So Nuno wasn't his only victim. He actually killed 2 other students. Then he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Now, what's really weird about this is both Valiente and Nuno, they both went to the same university in Portugal. So now they're basically just calling this a personal dispute. And again, it might be. But here's the part that I keep coming back to. The director of MIT's most important fusion energy laboratory was shot and killed by a man who then immediately died before anybody could ask him any questions. To me, it kind of sounds like a script written for a movie. Now, they say that the case is officially closed and there's no further investigation into the motive. There's no explanation for why a man would travel from Portugal, carry out a mass shooting, and then specifically hunt down someone that he knew that he went to school with. And also, he's the director of America's leading research laboratory in the fusion energy. So now they say that the case is officially closed. There's no more investigation as to what the motive was. And there's no explanation for why a man would travel from Portugal, carry out a mass shooting, and then specifically hunt down the director of America's leading fusion research center. They say case closed, just like that. Something just doesn't add up. Then we have a guy by the name of Jason Thomas, just 46 years old. Now, Jason, he worked for one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world called Novartis. He was actually the associate director of chemical biology. But here's what most people are not talking about. Novartis, it had active Department of Defense contracts, meaning Jason Thomas wasn't just a pharmaceutical researcher. He was connected to defense work. Then in December 12th of 2025, Jason, he left his home late one night in Massachusetts and he didn't come back. And then later his wife, she of course reported him missing, when he didn't come home. But something that's really weird about this story is they actually found surveillance footage of him walking around midnight down some train tracks. And another strange detail is he left his phone and wallet at home. Does that sound familiar? Now, the authorities, they did their best to try to find him. They couldn't find a trace of him. And then 3 months later, his body was recovered. They actually found him in a lake. The lake was frozen, but when that lake thawed, that's when they found his body. Authorities said that there was no foul play suspected. And of course, the cause and manner of death was never publicly disclosed. Now, like I said before, people go missing, people are found in lakes and, people drown, this, that, and other. But what's crazy is it's like a pattern starting to, form here. I mean, you can explain away one or two of these things, but when you put them together, it's just something just sounds strange to me. Okay, this last one is about a lady by the name of Amy Eskridge. And I saved Amy for last because out of every case that we've discussed tonight, Amy's case is the one that keeps me up. Now, Amy was only 34 years old when she passed, but she had accomplished a lot in those years. Now, one of her main claims to fame was she was the president and co-founder of the Institute for Exotic Science there in Huntsville, Alabama. Believe me, I know what that sounds like when you hear something like exotic science. It kind of sounds weird, but just stay with me for a second. Because Amy, she wasn't some fringe researcher chasing fairy tales in her garage. She actually came from good stock. Her father was a NASA engineer. His name is Richard Eskridge. But Amy, she worked her butt off herself. She had a double major in biology and chemistry, a master's degree in electrical engineering, and she was working on some of the most cutting-edge propulsion research in the country, specifically anti-gravity technology. This is the kind of research that, if it actually worked, it would change everything. I'm talking energy, national defense, space travel, hell, I'm talking everything. And Amy believed that she was getting close. But here's where Amy's story gets dark. She didn't just believe in her work. She was almost afraid of it. Now understand, she wasn't afraid of the science. She was afraid of what knowing too much was doing to her life. You see, starting around 2020, Amy began telling people that something bad was happening to her. She claimed that she was being watched, that people were breaking into her home, and the pressure to stop her work was getting more aggressive by the day. And in May of 2020, she actually sat down for a recorded interview. And what she said in that interview, I need you to hear it from her own mouth.
I'm scared. I'm tired. I'm real tired. I need to disclose soon, man. I need to publish soon because it's like escalating. It's getting more and more aggressive. Like over the past, this has been going on for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And over the past 12 months, it's been like escalating, like more aggressive, more invasive, digging through my pantage, like digging through my underwear drawer and sexual threats over the past like 3 to 6 months. And now I'm like, I have to publish. I have to publish because like it's only going to get worse.
Now, I want you to sit with that for a second. That's not someone being dramatic, and that's not someone seeking attention. That's a 32-year-old woman, a scientist, sitting in front of a camera, telling the world that she's scared to death. And not only that, she said it's getting worse, and she feels like the only thing that's protecting her is to be visible, which is exactly why she started that institute that we were talking about earlier. That's why she started it, because she knew that if she kept her work private, nobody would ever know what happened to her. So she went public, she created a platform, she did interviews, and she built a presence because she believed that being seen was the only thing that was keeping her alive. And she said that too right there in that same interview. Take a listen.
I started the Institute for one reason, the Institute. I started it as a public-facing persona to disclose anti-gravity technology through, because I told Mark this. If you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. If you stick your neck out in private, they will bury you. They will burn down your house while you're sleeping in your bed, and it won't even make the news. That's why the Institute exists.
Now, what's crazy is this isn't all I found about this crazy story. She actually sent out a text to a friend of hers by the name of Frank Milburn. Now, I'm going to be mentioning him later on as well. But her text said that if you see any reports that I killed myself, I most definitely did not. Then she said, if you see any report that I overdosed myself, she also said, I most definitely did not. Then she said that if you see any report that I killed anyone else, I most definitely did not. Now, to me, that's not something that a crazy person would do, to make sure that she sends out a text to a friend saying that she's not, and she's not going to hurt herself or anybody else. And then not even a month later of sending those texts, on June 11th of 2022, Amy Eskridge was found dead in Huntsville, Alabama. Authorities, they ruled it a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Then they said case closed. There was no public investigative report from law enforcement, and there was no statement from a medical examiner. It was just closed. Now, here's what I need you to know. Remember, I mentioned her friend Frank Milburn earlier. Well, he still plays a pretty important role after she dies. Frank wasn't just this fly-by-night dude. He knew his stuff. He was actually a retired British intelligence officer. He not only worked with Amy, he also investigated all that harassment that was going on with her. He documented everything, and he was trying to build a case around what was going on. And after she died, Frank, he submitted his findings to Congress. And his conclusion, Amy's death, it was not a He alleged that she had been through a bunch of bad stuff, like physical and psychological attacks from who I don't know, but I can guess.
I've been in contact with her for well over a year before she. I had documented her harassment, which actually started a couple of years before that. So she was probably between 3 years and 4 years of this intense harassment. I also spoke to her co-workers while she was still alive. And in one instance, those photos that you showed of a directed energy weapon attack with microwaves, that actually took place. And she called me straight afterwards and then sent me the videos, which I've also provided to News Nation, basically explaining the attack. And there was another scientist, expert witness there as well. And this wasn't the only one. And I spoke to her, 4 hours before she died. A month before that, she sent me another one of those similar messages. I'm not going to commit. I'm not going to kill myself or anybody else. I'm not going to overdose. If I die, treat it as suspicious. And she calls me 4 hours before she died. Everything was fine. And then somewhere between 4 and 5 hours later, I get a call and I find out that she's dead.
He also included what he described as a directed energy weapon incident that caused burns all over Amy's body. Now, those are his findings and his words. And he submitted all this through official channels to the United States Congress. These aren't my words, like I said, these are his. But I'll go ahead and tell you this. The Institute for Exotic Science Research, their website, it's gone. It was taken down right after her death. There's no archive, no explanation, and no forwarding address. It's just gone like she never existed. But she did exist, and she warned us, not once, but twice, on camera. And she did this in her own voice just 2 years before they closed her case and just moved on. The question that I keep asking myself, it's pretty simple. If Amy Eskridge took her own life, why did she spend the last 2 years of it telling anyone that would listen that someone was trying to end it for her? Honestly, I don't have that answer, but believe me, I think someone out there, they do. Okay, so where do I land on all this? You knew I'd get there eventually, and I'm going to be straight with you because that's what we do here. Honestly, I don't think that there's one clean answer. I think that there's a mix. For instance, I think some of this could be foreign adversaries. You got places like China, Russia, and Iran. These are countries that have spent decades quietly trying to neutralize America's expertise in things like nuclear and advanced technologies. Hell, you've even got former FBI officials that said that out loud. That's not a theory, that's geopolitics. And I also think some of this is institutional self-protection. Because believe it or not, powerful institutions, they tend to try to protect themselves. They always have, and they always will. You see, when knowledge becomes a threat to power, power always tries to find a way to fix it. I also think that some of this touches on things that go even deeper. Things like UAPs and advanced technology. How you've got programs that are so classified that even the people running them, they don't even know the full picture. And I also think some of this is just the oldest story in the world. Some of this could be people that know too much in a world that knowing too much could get you into a lot of trouble. Now, here's what I want to leave you with. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I never have been. What we do here is look at the facts and follow them where they lead us. And we try to ask questions that nobody else wants to ask. And I trust you to make up your own mind. Because here's the thing about the truth. It doesn't always come wrapped up neat. Sometimes it's messy and sometimes it's really uncomfortable. But it still deserves to be looked at directly without flinching. You've got 11 people connected to the most sensitive research in this country, and they're either dead or missing. You've got the FBI and the House Oversight Committee, they're both investigating. Then you have the President of the United States that called this pretty serious stuff. Now, that's not conspiracy. Those are facts. And facts deserve answers. And these people deserve better than silence. And somewhere out there tonight, Neil McCasland, the man that started all of this, he still hasn't been found at the time of this recording. His family, they're still waiting. And so are we. And that, my friends, is where I'm going to leave it tonight. Not because there's nothing left to say. Trust me, there is plenty left to say. But because there's some stories that don't have endings yet, and this is one of those stories. And honestly, that's what makes it worth watching. Not only that, it's worth talking about and paying attention to it. Now, before I let you go, I want to ask you something. And I want you to really think about this one. Because out of everything we've talked about tonight, this might be the most important question that we've asked. First, who benefits the most from losing these people? And who is hurt the most by their absence? Now, I want you to think about it and really think about it, because the answer to that question might tell you more about what's really going on here. Go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know where you land on this, because this is the kind of conversation that deserves more than one voice. I also want to hear from you personally. If you've got your own story, something that happened to you that you just can't explain, something paranormal, something mysterious, or something that's been sitting in the back of your mind for years, but you've just been too afraid to tell anybody because you don't want anybody to laugh at you. Believe me, I'm not going to laugh at you. I want to hear it. All you have to do is reach out to me directly at relativeperspective76@gmail.com, or you can visit my new website at relativeperspectivemedia.com. You never know, maybe your story becomes part of our next episode. And if you've got an idea for a topic that you would like me to dig into, all you have to do is send it to that same email, or you can send it to the new website that we got. Hell, if you don't remember it, I'll go ahead and put it down in the descriptions below. Remember, this show, it's built for you, so go ahead and reach out to me. Now, if this is your first time joining us at Relative Perspective, welcome home. You know what to do. All you have to do is pound down on the subscribe button, hit the like button, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a weekly upload. And if you've been rocking with us from the beginning, you already know what this is. You know that we don't do surface level stuff here. We dig, we question, and we follow the facts wherever they lead us. And we never ever stop asking. Because the moment that we stop asking is the moment that they win. So keep asking, keep digging, and definitely keep your eyes open. Again, I want to thank you for watching. This has been Relative Perspective. As always, I'm your host, Stephen. And remember, the truth, it depends on where you're standing. And that, my friends, is Relative Perspective. God bless you. We love you. And have a good night. Whew. This was dark all night long. Okay, Rosie, let's go outside. Dada tired. Love you. Goodbye. All night long.